I'm going to give up on additional attendance. Shall we just hop in? Let's do it. All right. So you're all here for extra credit? Bravo. Good on you. So there's this apocryphal Chinese curse, right, that says, may you live in interesting times. And it turns out it's apocryphal. Nobody ever said that besides me just now. But we do indeed live in interesting times. And so what I want to do is spend some time explaining what's going to happen tomorrow, because I think presidential elections in the Electoral College are just grossly misunderstood. And the process is not well understood, and it's extraordinarily hard to explain to somebody how it is that we select our leader. And I kind of want to spend some time doing that, and then we can look at some predictions, toss a few questions around, and we'll call it a draw. Right? We'll call it an evening. All right, so my name's Kris Seago. I chair the government department here at ACC. Worked with Roy for a long time. Got a handful of degrees in this stuff, and I'm just fascinated by this stuff. So you're gonna have to tolerate me for 45 minutes or so, and as I try to share my fascination with this material, and hope my remote control works. And here's the agenda. Here's what I want to do. I want to talk about the goal of the Electoral College, what it's intended to do, and then I want to back way back to the 1780s and ask what processes did the founders have available that they could have reached off in their toolkit, and why did they choose this particular process, and then look at the nuts and bolts of the process itself, and then try and sort of pick it apart. And then look at some predictions. I think the predictions are pretty much solidified for how this is going to work out. And then we'll play Q&A for a little bit. All right, so the goal is pretty simple. All right, the goal of what we're doing tomorrow is to wind up with someone to serve as the head of the executive branch. Right, and that's really pretty simple. There's about 208 countries around the world, depending on how you count, and the vast majority of them have some form of an executive branch, and the vast majority of them have a process in place to select that executive. I can say almost without reservation that the process that we use is unlike that used by any other country. Our process is incredibly unique, it's really archaic, and it's really hard to understand. I'm going to say that over and over. It's really hard to understand the process that we have in place. So you want to step back for just a second and imagine that you're designing a system that needs somebody to head the executive branch. What options what could you do? What processes could you employ to select a leader? You've made a couple of noises, so I'm going to pick on you. What process would you put in place? Imagine you're designing the system. What would you do? Oh, let's say 320 million. 320 million? Yeah, and about 250 million can vote, right? I'm not sure. Oh, come on.
You get a system on the internet where everybody's vote counts as one vote, and the internet, the computer keeps track of it, and whoever has more wins.
That's like the most simple process imaginable, right? I mean, you let eligible voters vote. At the end of the election, you tally up the votes. Whoever gets the most votes wins. That's like democracy, right? That's kind of how we imagine that it works. And only in the most remote sense is that the system we use. I mean, only in the most remote sense. And I sort of like your notion of an electronic democracy, right? I think we should all be walking around with G phones, right? Government phones. And we would periodically be asked questions. And one of those would be, once every 4 years, we'd ask who should be the leader. And you'd have a multiple choice option there. And, fingerprint ID to guarantee that you're the person voting. You select somebody at the end of the night. We've got a leader. Right? It is so simple. Right? It's so incredibly simple. And most advanced democracies do a variation of that, right? Sort of a subtle variation of that. But if you back up to the 1780s, right, well, obviously we didn't have phones, we didn't have an internet. We had experimented in a handful of nations with democracy. Right, and that was one option, was let the eligible voters vote for the leader. We'll tally up all of those votes, and then that person will be the leader. And we do need to step back for just a second. Who was eligible to vote in 1787? White men, white landowning males, right? White landowning males. Best guess about 4 or 5% of the population. We don't have census data to work with, but not many of us were white landowning males, right? So it wouldn't have been that hard to conduct elections under those conditions. The founders certainly could have done something like that. They could have put something in place like a monarchy. Of course, we were just breaking apart from that, so we probably didn't want to be testing blood. we could fight periodically, or we could let a handful of elite people select the leaders. And we kind of pushed all of that together, and we wound up with a system that's got a little bit of democracy and a little bit of elitism tossed inside there. All right. And this is the system. I want to show a short video, and actually it runs on for a little bit too long, but I want to show a video that I think demonstrates how our process works, and there's sound associated with it, and I hope it's not way too loud. Have you seen one of those machines before? It's called a Rube Goldberg machine. Right? It's an incredibly complicated machine intended to accomplish an incredibly simple task. And that's kind of what the Electoral College is. It's this really simple task, but we've designed this really complex system to accomplish something that's really just quite simple. And clearly this was done by people who have way too much time on their hands. Right? I mean, just way too much time. All right. So the Electoral College, or not the Electoral College, but our selection system, it uses a two-step process. And we're at the second step in the process. And so earlier this summer, we saw the first step finish up. And the first step, and I don't want to spend much time here at all because it's gone, and it may not involve the same set of steps for the next presidential election. But the two political parties, or however many you want to say, there's two primary political parties, they conduct internal contests to wind up with one nominee, right? And so they conduct a series of contests, and at the end of those contests, sort of Highlander style, right, with each candidate lopping the other candidate's head off, you wind up with one candidate representing both of the political parties. And these are party events that are run by the parties under party rules, not designed by the Constitution, not designed by the founders. These are fungible and can change at any point in time. All right. So again, I don't want to spend a lot of time here. The Democrats this time around designed this game that had 4,765 points in it, and you needed to get 50% plus one of those points to become the nominee, right? And they were distributed thusly, and here's how this contest ran itself out, with Secretary Clinton winning the game that the Democrats had designed. And, some folks who were Bernie supporters weren't really happy with the way the game was designed. I don't know what to tell you, right? It's the way the game was designed. Secretary Clinton won the game. All right. If we look at the Republican side, they had designed a similar, although slightly different game that involved 2,472 points, and you needed to get 50% plus one of those, and we know how that game worked out. Right? This was the distribution, and Mr. Trump won that game. Right, and to the surprise and chagrin of a bunch of us, right? He won the game, and at the end of those primary contests, the two major political parties had their nominees, right? And then we move into the second stage, which is what actually involves the Electoral College, and this is described in the Constitution, and to change it involves a change to the Constitution. Right. It's a very unusual name, and I think it's a very unfortunate name because nowhere else do you run those two words together, right? Electoral College, right? So it's a very unusual name, and there's kind of the definition of what the Electoral College is. It's a body of electors chosen or appointed by a larger group, and that gives you some insight to what's going to happen tomorrow. It's a body of people charged with selecting the president. Okay, and so again, we want to back up to 1787, and you need to understand that the founders were afraid of democracy, of small d democracy, right? They were afraid of it. They'd looked around and they'd seen democracies going bad, and when democracies go bad, people die, right? And they wanted to go to pretty great lengths to assure that we didn't have a pure democracy, that we didn't all have a vote. Even those of us who were white landowning males, they weren't trusted enough to select the president. They wanted the most elite of the elite to select the president. And the design there was to insulate selection of the president from the general public. So it's an insulative device. Right? Does that metaphor make sense? Right? It's an insulative device. Right? And so you'll note that's not in Fahrenheit, that's in centigrade. But the idea there is to protect the selection of the president from the heat of the general public and their passions being inflamed and making bad decisions and that sort of thing. So we would, rather than have the general public select via the internet, we'd have a very small group of elites select the president for us. Right? And that's essentially the system we have in place today, right? with very few changes. Why won't my remote work? Just to put it down, right? So in this design put forth by the founders, each state was given what were called electors, right? And electors were those qualified to vote for the president or select the president. That's where a portion of this name comes from, electors. Each state was charged with sending a varying amount of people to participate in this very small election. The determination for the number of electors, it's very simple. The numbers look sort of odd when you look at them on a map, but it's very simple. You take the number of representatives to the National Congress that a state gets, and the smallest state gets how many representatives? Representatives. The smallest states, and there's a handful of them, get exactly one representative. Right? North Dakota, South Dakota, right? Then you add the number of senators, right? And think back to 8th grade when Coach What's-His-Name taught your government class, right? Each state gets 2 senators, regardless of population. So the smallest of states gets 3 electors, right? They get 3 electors, right? And it's really important to note that it's not the senators and the representatives that are electors. They're prohibited from being such, right? So it's not the representatives and the senators. Those numbers are merely used to tally up how many electors a given state gets. Okay. And as we've scaled the system up, we've wound up with a system that has 538 electors. Right? It was 535 for the longest time, and then we gave Washington, D.C., which is in a very odd situation, we gave it 3 electors, all right, by amending the Constitution. It was 535, then we gave them a voice in this election, and it wound up at 538. It's been static at 538 for a long time. Right. And then here's kind of the most common map distribution that you'll see. And this is shaded with somebody's guess at how the election is going to go, right? Pay no attention to that, all right? All I'm wanting you to get out of this is the distribution of electors. So there's a couple of giant prizes up there. What are the giant prizes? California, Texas. Then the prizes drift off pretty rapidly. Then we go New York, Florida. Then we start to drift off really rapidly, and there's a bunch of itty-bitty prizes, all right? A bunch of itty-bitty prizes. But these maps are really kind of, I see these maps post-election, and people will talk about, but look at the huge space that so-and-so won, and yet somebody who won just a little bit of space over here, how'd they win the election, right? And this really seems to puzzle people. And the thing to keep in mind is land does not vote. Square feet do not vote. Square miles do not vote. People vote, right? And this is roughly proportional to population. In a very simple sense, it's roughly proportional to population. Right? Some folks have taken attempts at sort of drawing these maps, cartographers we call them, to make them look more representative, and they're kind of interesting, right? So that's kind of the states scaled to their weight in the Electoral College. And yes, it hurts your eyes, but it gives you a feel for how somebody could win just a handful of states, a handful of the most populous states, losing a whole bunch of the little bitty states, and yet take away the game. Right? Or here's another attempt, right, that still kind of hurts my eyes. Right? But it's still, you'll note the size of Alaska, land-wise, by far the largest state, but they only get 3 electors because nobody lives there. Right? There is less population in Alaska than in Austin proper. Right? So we don't give them much weight in the Electoral College. Right. Okay. To make this really make sense, count the number of states there. And then give me a number. 7 big states. And then New Jersey, right, which is drawn to scale, right? New Jersey has more voters in it than those 7 states. All right, so again, I think that helps kind of understand it's not square footage that's voting. It's not square footage that matters in this contest. It's population, right? Again, in kind of a rough sense. All right. Okay. So this is a contest. You take 538 and you divide it by 2. Math majors, how many is that? 269. You add 1. To win the contest, you must have a simple majority, and that's 50% plus 1. So you take 269, you add 1. So the contest is to get to 270, right? First to 270 wins. So far, so good. All right. Feel free to stop me, right, at any point. All right. The distribution process varies by state. 49 states use one system, and then 2 states are outliers and use a different system. And in fact, those outliers may sort of show us a way to an improved system, right? And we should thank our brothers and sisters in what 2 states? Nebraska and Maine, right? They're really kind of leading the way here. Most states, including Texas, have a winner-take-all system. Someone will get all 38 electors that Texas has. Someone will get all 55 electors that California has, and that's the way most states distribute their electors. Maine and Nebraska are relatively progressive. The person who wins the state, who wins the majority of the state, gets 2 votes, and then they look at each congressional district and ask who won in that district, and then allocate individual votes based on congressional district. And that allows a little bit of proportionality. Right? Instead of winner take all, a little bit of proportionality. Right? Okay. Then I think it's helpful to drop back and look at a calendar of events and say, what's going to happen on what day, right? What's going to happen tomorrow? That's not a trick question. What's going to happen tomorrow? It's election day, right? And what does that mean? I hope not. I got things left to do. I got some stuff that I haven't gotten accomplished yet, right? Polls are going to open up at 7 o'clock in the morning, right? And I haven't voted yet, so I'm going to go vote tomorrow. I like to vote on election day. I like to go to my precinct, and I like to see which of my neighbors show up. And I like to listen into them and hear what they're talking about, right? It gives you real insight to people, right? And it's just sort of fun, right? So I'm going to go vote tomorrow morning, right? And most of us, what do you think's going on in their mind? What do you think they are doing? Boy, that was a terrible sentence, right? Most people tomorrow, they're going to see some names on the ballot. What do they think they're doing? They think they are voting directly for the president, right? They are wrong, right? They are absolutely wrong. That's not at all what they're doing. Turn to that in just a second. The Electoral College is run by the National Archives, right? And so the rules and the dates are set by the National Archive, and it allows us to have a ruling body over this undertaking, and they've outlined what's going to happen day by day. And you'll note that the election doesn't end on November the 8th, right? And in fact, that's really the first step in this process, right? And I want you to note what they're describing there. That first sentence says it all. You smile largely. So what are we going to do tomorrow? We're going to select electors tomorrow, right? We're not voting directly for president and vice president. We're voting for a political party to send their electors to the Electoral College. And if you read your ballot closely, it will reveal that to you, right? It's there. It's in fine print, but it's there, right? But again, 99+% of us think we're voting directly for the president, right? And we are absolutely not. But click away from that and go back here. Tomorrow we call it general election. It's election day, right? And over 100 million of us, probably close to 120 million of us by the time we tally it all up, early votes, plus those of us that'll vote tomorrow, maybe 120, maybe 130 million of us are going to troop off, and we're going to go through this really primitive process, and we're going to use old machines designed in 1998 that look like see-and-say machines, right, that are really kind of laughable, but that's what we're going to use, right? And we're going to cast our votes, and we are going to select electors, right? And in our country, election day falls on a really odd day, and that's the criteria for what election day is, right? It's the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November on even-numbered years, right? And that standard was set about 150 years ago when it made sense, when we were an agrarian nation and you needed to travel to be able to vote. You would hop on a horse or you would walk, and you couldn't vote on Sunday because that was a religious holiday, right? And Tuesday made as much sense as any, right? And we've just hung on to Tuesday since then, right? And again, what we're voting for are electors to participate in the Electoral College, right? Not directly for the president, the vice president. Then the polls will close in Texas tomorrow night at 7, and we have 254 counties, and each county conducts their elections independently. We will gather all of that data together. That data will be sent to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State will tally that data up, and probably sometime before midnight we'll know how the election went, right? But it might be as late as midnight, right? People will make predictions early, but the official count probably won't be done, hopefully by midnight. You know, that would be nice. And we are voting for these people, right? And these are the precise people that we're voting for. These are the electors. They were selected this summer by the two political parties. I've arbitrarily just plucked out the Republicans and the Democrats because I think those are the parties that have the most likelihood of winning tomorrow, right? The Libertarian Party also has electors. The Green Party also has electors. Each of the certified write-in candidates have electors as well. So you pick the people who will serve as electors for you. Right? And if you were to count from top to bottom, how many names would you count? You'd count 38. Right? You'd count 38 because Texas gets 38 electors. Right? And the thing I want to reinforce here, these are flesh and blood people. Right? These are honest to goodness people. We could very easily stalk. Right? We could stalk them if we wanted to. We could pick one of their names, drop it off on the Google box, right? And it would come back with the result. Right? And we could stalk them quite easily. Who do you think these people are? I mean, do you think they were picked accidentally? Do you think the Democratic Party went through like the phone book? Even more tightly defined than that. Hardcore Democrats and hardcore Republicans. The phrase I would use, the most loyal Republicans you have ever met in your life and the most loyal Democrats you have ever met in your life, who've been awarded something that is taken very seriously. They will be, or they might be, the electors to participate in the Electoral College. One of 538 people actually qualified to vote for president. Right? So this is a real prize to be identified by your party as an elector. So when we go to vote tomorrow, we're actually voting for which set of people will participate in the Electoral College. Making sense? I don't think it makes any sense at all. I'm going to rephrase that. Do you understand the process? I don't think the process makes any sense at all, but I understand it. Right? And that's about all I can ask you to do. Do you understand the process? And you'll note they are from real cities, right? Kind of spread around the state. Right? And the two parties have different mechanisms for choosing their electors, but you nailed it. These are the most loyal Democrats and Republicans you'll ever meet. They have served long and hard. Right? They do not currently hold, they're not representatives and they're not senators. Right? I met one this summer. Someone who was an elector in 2008, and I'd never met an elector before, and I actually had to reach out and touch him, right, and be able to go, ooh, Electoral College, right, and I have touched an elector, right. I didn't wash my hand for the longest time. Texas is a Republican state, right, we know that. So in 2008, the Republican Party sent their electors, and he was number 33, right, Ronnie Risinger. Right, Ronnie Risinger. And he lives in, do you know Ronnie Risinger? Yeah. Absolutely. He's like the most loyal Republican you will ever meet in your life. Right? Really nice guy, right? Just a super nice guy. I gave a little talk at a high school on the Electoral College, very similar to this one, right? And afterwards he came up and he said, I was in the Electoral College in 2008, right? And I'm like, ooh, touched him, right? There he is. Right. He teaches government at Lhasa High School, right? Yeah, he teaches at Lhasa. Right? And he's a loyal Republican and was rewarded as such by being identified as an elector, and he took part in this process in 2008. Right? I think that drives home that these are real people, right? These are real people. This isn't just some arbitrary number. Real people are involved in this process. Right? And truly the nicest guy you'll ever meet, right? For the 10 minutes that I talked to him. Just an ultra nice guy. Right? Then each state must go through and it must certify how the election went in their state. Right? So Texas has until December the 19th to put together this certificate. Right? And it has this really awkward name. What's the name of the certificate? The Certificate of Ascertainment. Right? Ascertaining how the election in Texas went. Right? And then that certificate must make it to the archivist in D.C. by the 19th. And this is the certificate from 2012. Right? This is the Texas certificate. Each state will put together a certificate listing, who got votes, and then listing the electors from that state that will participate in the Electoral College. And there's the Texas version with Rick Perry's really pretty signature. He's got a very pretty signature. And if you jump forward, you'd learn that these 38 people were selected in 2012 to serve as the Texans participating in the Electoral College. Right? And there they are. Right? And what we know about them is that they are 38 of the most loyal Republicans you've ever met in your life. Right? Yeah, isn't that a great name, right? Texas Moore, right? In one of my classes, we stalked him, and he looks exactly like Texas Moore. I mean, just exactly like you would imagine Texas Moore to look like. These were the poor Democrats who did not get to participate. They got to stay home. All right. Then on that same day, on Monday, December the 19th, and there's a little rule that we follow. It's the Monday following the second Wednesday in December. So you look at a calendar, you find 2 Wednesdays, you follow the Monday that follows that, and that's the day that this happens. Right? So it's not always December the 19th. Right? Not always. Right? All of the electors in each state meet in their state capital. Right? So we have 50 states, 50 sets of electors, plus those in DC. They meet, and what do you think they do? They all get together, and they vote. Right? And they vote, and they cast their votes for president and vice president. All right? So this is kind of a trick question. When does the election take place? I think it takes place in December. Right? That the real selection for the president is not tomorrow. Right? We tomorrow are selecting the people who in turn will select the president for us on December the 19th. Right? Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah, I was going to say, with what you two guys have put together, right? Must they vote as loyal Republicans and as loyal Democrats? Are they bound to do so? That's the question, right? That's the question. Right? Legal scholars disagree, right? And about half the states have passed laws dictating that you will vote as a loyal Republican or as a loyal Democrat.
Which makes sense, because if you didn't, then the people who voted, their vote would have meant nothing to put you in that position. Because if I'm voting for, a Democrat,
Yeah.
and then the person who goes as representative of me
Right.
to vote for that Democrat then just decides they're voting Republican, then
Yeah.
it's not representative at all.
Right.
It's just him being an asshole.
That's one way to say it, right? Or, to play devil's advocate, the system's working exactly as the founders intended. We've selected a very elite group of people to go in turn vote for us, right?
But that
Yeah.
makes one of the steps redundant.
It most certainly does, and ridiculous, and utterly ridiculous. Again, sort of, calling weird on this whole system. Yeah, right. So those electors, right, they will vote for president and vice president, and they prepare a document called the Certificate of Vote. Right, the Certificate of Vote. Right. And there's the Certificate of Vote from Texas from 2012. Right, so Texas has taken steps to address your concerns. Right? The Republican Party, because they're smart, have prepared a document that's already filled out, and all you, as the 38 electors, do is walk up and sign your name to it. And yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm more than a little bit confused, right?
The electors don't put their votes until December?
December 19th. Yeah.
So we don't actually find out?
I think you are absolutely correct. We, the public, do not actually know who won the election. And we don't really even know then. Not in any real sense. So tomorrow night, someone will be declared victor. Right? The networks will step out tomorrow, because we do know for the most part that these electors are going to vote as their political party wishes them to do. Right? But the reality is they could throw caution to the wind, right, and vote their conscience on December the 19th, as the founders intended, right? The founders intended just a selection of very elite people to get together and select the president. Did that help or hurt?
I mean, that makes sense, but
No, it doesn't. I want to rephrase. I want to quit using that. Yeah, yeah. That's what I want you to say. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like,
I
if
understand
there's a
it.
really close election,
Mhm.
and it could come down to just a couple of electoral
Yeah.
votes, how likely is it that somebody's gonna, like, would ever consider doing something really shady and, like, kidnapping somebody, or, like, threatening somebody, or blackmailing somebody? I mean, if there's only 538 people,
Or bribing them
Yeah.
with huge amounts of money,
Right.
right? Because we know who these people are,
right?
right?
I mean, obviously they have to flee the country afterward, but, like,
You know, it appears in the current environment, you wouldn't even have to flee the country, right? You could just say it's
a little bit
smart.
like a mob in a smoke-filled room.
Yeah, and it looks very banana republic-y, right? It really does. It looks really icky. Yeah, it looks really icky. It's an interesting system we put in place, all right? And you know, part of me really kind of want to see the system break. I mean, really break in a really awful fashion, so that we would all take a step back from it and go, should we keep using this system, or should we do something else, right? Should we maybe all just vote? Yes, ma'am?
Why are their names, not anonymous? Is it for the purpose of,
I do not know the answer to that.
just because
Right.
bringing up bribery, just like,
Right, bribery and threats and that sort of stuff, right? For the most part, these elections aren't even considered that serious, right? You know, that we wouldn't do that, and there's sort of the sanctity of the vote, right?
so since tomorrow we're the ones who elect the
Electors, right?
so we kind of know like who the president's going to be.
We have a
They don't know until December.
correct.
So what if like these people are not as loyal as they seem to be, and then it's actually the opposite? Then what will happen?
Or, I mean, it's really easy to imagine, and in Texas, that the Republican electors are very likely to be chosen, right? I can honestly imagine well-intending Republicans meeting on that day and thinking long and hard about Donald Trump. Long and hard, right, about is he fit to represent, you know, the Republican Party? Is he fit to be president? And I think that'd just be fascinating. All right, I would just love to see that play out. You know, I think it'd be great. Yes, sir.
So what is it that happened in the 2000 election with Bush and Gore?
Yeah, I want to turn to that. I mean, the system really broke, right, in 2000. The Electoral College operated exactly as it should have, right? But it exposed the flaws in the process itself. You know, to cut to the chase, Al Gore got almost 600,000 more popular votes than then Governor Bush did. But because of the mechanics of the Electoral College, it selected Governor Bush. The loser won, right? You should never have in place a system that allows the loser to win, right? Okay, and if we were to look here, Texas Moore's name appears somewhere. There he is, right? Texas Moore in the second column. Again, these are real flesh and blood people, right? This is public. This takes place in the Capitol, and the House of Representatives, and you can go observe it if you want to. So you can watch the vote take place from the visitors' gallery. And it's kind of an interesting thing to do. You can go, ooh, look, the Electoral College, and you can point down at it. All right? Okay. Then those certificates of vote from each state has to make it to Washington, D.C. All right? And we give it a substantial amount of time. Again, you've got to think about when this system was designed. You didn't have FedEx, right? You didn't have the ability to fly. So we gave some time for this to happen. And it must make it to the President of the Senate by December the 28th. All right, so those votes, all right, the certificate of vote from each of the states plus D.C. has to make it to the President of the Senate. And who's the President of the Senate? Vice President. So who's the President of the Senate? Joe Biden, right? So Joe Biden, it is his duty to collect all of these votes, right, and to sort of store them. And they're often transported in these funky looking old wooden boxes that have been used forever, you know, and they're trotted on, Then, on January 6th, in the new year, we'll have a joint session of Congress where both the Senate and the House will meet in the House of Representatives, and we'll go through this really arcane process. We'll start alphabetically with the first state, and there'll be a bunch of speechifying, right? And then that state will announce the vote of its electors. And we proceed through until somebody gets 270 votes. And at that point, we've counted the votes, and we can announce that somebody is president and vice president. All right. This is also open, but you have to have a ticket. And the tickets are kind of hard to come by. Okay, so who's that? Joe Biden, President of the Senate.
Counting the electoral vote for President and Vice President of the United States, term beginning on the 20th day of January, 2013.
Stating the vote for President of the United States as delivered to the President of the Senate is as follows. The whole number of electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538, of which the majority is 207. Barack Obama, of the state of Illinois, received for President of the United States 332 votes. Mitt Romney, of the state of Massachusetts, has received 206 votes. The state of the vote for Vice President of the United States delivered to the President of the Senate is as follows. The whole number of electors appointed to vote for Vice President of the United States is 538, and the majority of which is 207. Joseph Biden, of the state of Delaware, has received for Vice President of the United States 332 votes. Paul Ryan, of the state of Wisconsin, has received 206 votes. This announcement of the state of the vote by the President of the Senate shall be deemed a sufficient declaration of the persons elected President and Vice President of the United States, each for the term beginning on the 20th day of January 2013, and shall be entered together with a list of votes in the Journal of the Senate and the House of Representatives.
That was really exciting, and he made it seem like paint drying, right? Which is kind of unfortunate. Okay. Then on the 20th of January, we swear in the president, right? And they take office. And I just really want to kind of reinforce it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Typically about 250,000 people will show up for the event. And it stretches a really long way. It's like the nation's religious event, right? It really is, right? It's like a pilgrimage to go watch this event. It's just amazing. If you have a chance to go see it, go see it. Go see it. Right? And then it's really kind of fun to look at. This is President Obama's first inauguration, and he looks like a kid, right? He just absolutely he looks so young. And here's, 7+ years later, he looks like a dried up little old man, right? And his daughters are huge now, right? They're huge. All right, that's kind of the Electoral College. All right. And it has a bunch of flaws inside of it and a bunch of what I would call what ifs, right? Potential pitfalls, right? And so, a serious what if, right? I mean, it's a terrible design. 538 is an even number. You can have an absolute tie, and it's pretty easy to put together an absolute tie. In the case of an absolute tie, the incoming House of Representatives selects the president. The incoming House of Representatives selects the president. Right? The vote that took place before does not matter. Does not matter. Right? And each state gets one vote. Right? Each state gets one vote. So Texas has 36 members of the House of Representatives, they would have to get together and agree as to how Texas was going to vote, right? And Texas would cast one vote, right? And we've done that twice, right? We did that in 1801 and we did that in 1825. It has happened, right? It has happened. Then to the question that we've already discussed here, what if you're a duly selected elector, right? Imagine you're given the honor of being an elector, and in your state capital on December the 19th, your conscience dictates that you vote differently than your political party, right? If you were to actually do that, we have a name for you. We call you a faithless elector, right? You have broken faith with your party, right, and with your state, right? A handful of electors have been faithless. Right? We've identified them. It happened not that long ago that an elector just wrote in a different name. Right? And so it does happen. 26 states, a little over half the states, have laws preventing you from doing so, but we've never tested those laws. We've never tested them. And the other states, there is no law preventing you from doing so. You may vote your conscience. Right? I think that is positively fascinating. And I think this year might have been a chance for us to actually see that, and it may yet be a chance for that to actually play out. Right? I can see folks scratching their head really long and hard, honestly, about both of the candidates at the top of the political parties. Right? Do we really want him? Do we really want her? Right? Or should we select somebody else? Right? Many people have put together sort of this hypothetical where one of the third-party candidates, Evan McMullen, there's some chance that he will win the state of Utah, right? There's some chance. He's from Utah. He's a Mormon, right? He's polling quite well. He may get Utah's vote. That would put him in the mix, right? And then if you had an absolute tie, right, or nobody got more than 270 votes, some people were saying, well, if it came down to it, a bunch of electors would rather have him than either Secretary Clinton or Mr. Trump. Right? And there was a path for him to become president by winning one state, right? And the House of Representatives might cast its vote, as it see fit. All right. Then there's, again, political scientists give these events awkward names, faithless electors and misfires, right? And a misfire is when the popular vote selects one candidate, but the Electoral College selects another candidate. And that's happened 4 times, most recently in your collective lifespans. All right, so in 2000, the system selected the loser. All right, so again, Vice President Al Gore got about 600,000 more votes than then Governor Bush did. Right? Yet by Electoral College vote, he got Governor Bush got 271 votes. Vice President Gore got 269. So it was as close as you could imagine, but by the rules, right, the Electoral College selected Governor Bush, and he became president. Right, we call that a misfire. All right. And then there's the question that I always pose, which is, why do we keep using this thing, right? Why cycle after cycle after cycle do we come back and use this really archaic, problem-laden mechanism? And the best explanation I can put together is that we have this deep-seated respect for the founders and for the document that they put together. We think that they have had infinite wisdom and that we should follow their design into infinity, right? That they were much smarter 200 plus years ago than anything that we could put together. And so we should do what they've given us. And then there's some really good evidence that those itty-bitty states, they really love this system because they get attention that they might otherwise not get. All right. Then as to alternatives, a bunch of alternatives have been proposed. And they go by these varying names, which are relatively straightforward. A direct popular vote with plurality rule. A direct popular vote with plurality rule. What does that last component add to it? Plurality rule.
You don't have to have a majority, you just have to have the most highest percentage.
You must have really well said, right? You nailed it. You don't necessarily have to have 50% plus one, although that would be beautiful, right, if you got 50% plus one. But whoever got the most votes, right, had the plurality, they would become president. Although if you had enough candidates, that number might actually be quite small, right? If you had 15 or 20 candidates on the ballot, you might wind up in a situation where with someone in the single digits became president, right? And it's got kind of a bad taste to it, doesn't it, right? That doesn't taste so good, right? So people have proposed a direct election with an instant runoff, right? A direct election with an instant runoff where you would rank every candidate on the ballot. You would rank somebody number 1, somebody number 2, somebody number 3, somebody number 4, and on through the number of candidates available on the ballot. You'd add up all of the number 1 votes, and if somebody had a majority, well, by golly, they're president. If you don't at that point have a majority, you throw out the last person on the ballot and you add all of the number 2 votes into the mix. And you see if you have somebody who has a majority. If you don't at that point, what do? You throw off the person at the bottom and you add the number 3 votes until somebody emerges with a majority. Right? That's got a nice intuitive appeal to it. Right? It's got a nice, simple, intuitive appeal. You would know at the end of election night who president was, right? Without this intermediary mechanism. Right? In proportional allocation, Texas has 38 votes. You would proportion those according to the popular vote. If it was a 60-40 vote, 60% Trump, 40% Clinton, you would apportion those 38 60-40, right, and cast them that way. You'd still use kind of the Electoral College, but you would introduce a little more democracy to it. You'd build on what Maine and Nebraska have done and use their system and spread it nationwide. And then there's a historian who has put together what he calls the National Bonus Plan. And it really doesn't make any sense. I just like the way it sounds. You use the Electoral College, and whoever gets a majority of the popular vote, you give them 102 more points. Right? And that's enough historically to have overcome any instance of where the person winning the popular vote would lose in the Electoral College. Right. Do any of those really strike you?
I mean, proportional allocation to me seems like the only way to be actually democratic about it, because if you don't do that, I mean, in Texas, I think it's probably way off with this number, but it's above 40% of the people in Texas vote Democrat for president, but those people basically have no vote at all.
None of their electors. Right, none of their electors show up. And, you know, the evidence seems to be that this time around it might be honestly pretty tight, right? You know, that it might be in the, 45-55 range, or maybe even tighter than that. And, those poor Democrats, they just cry themselves to sleep at night because they get nothing.
It just seems like it becomes not so much about representing the people in a state as just a dog-eat-dog, winner takes all, and then you just kind of forget about everybody else. And Texas is a big state with a lot of people, so I mean, 45% of those people might as well stay home.
Right.
The word democracy just doesn't really apply there. It seems like that would need to happen with people.
You really you cut to the chase there at the end for me. It's not much of a democracy when so many of your votes are just kind of silenced away.
Democrats too in California. I mean, there's
Republicans are disenfranchised. Yeah.
A lot of Republicans there. I just think it would represent the nation more than it does right now.
It would just taste better. It would taste a lot better. If you're going to represent yourself as a democracy, you should have more elements of a democracy, right, inside there.
And also, I just don't understand why we have this fixation with the Founding Fathers system when they pretty much were explicitly creating an oligarchy,
Yeah.
Like, it's fine.
Or dodging their
If
taxes,
we
or
want to be an oligarchy, that's fine, but I think that the average American would say that they're not.
yeah.
So, it's weird. It's like this cognitive dissonance.
I think we can still recognize what they did, but say, wow, 200 years have passed, and it's time to do something else, right? That that systems have moved forward. 1, 2, the first 2, and the last one would require modification to the Constitution itself. Right. So proportional allocation could be done inside each state. each state could individually decide, we're going to proportion our votes. We're going to allocate them proportionally, and the district plan, each state could do what Maine and Nebraska are doing without amending the Constitution. And even those sort of intermediary steps would get us a much more small d democratic system. That I think we could all be a little more proud of.
How do we go about doing something like that, though? Like, I mean, at this point, aren't states that are either red or blue so entrenched in being red or blue?
It's a Sisyphean task, right? To convince the Republicans who control the Texas legislature to change the system is a Sisyphean task, right? So I just don't place much stock in the ability to do that, right? And so then we're looking at amending the Constitution, right? And that's a non-trivial task, right? That is really non-trivial. My remote control just doesn't want to work. And then you guys have probably seen these predictions, right? So there's a bunch of folks out there who are making a name for themselves by predicting outcomes. This was published inside the New York Times, so it's not surprising that they listed themselves first. But the numbers, I don't know if you can make them out there. Those are the probabilities of Secretary Clinton winning the election tomorrow. And I think just about everybody agrees that she has a meaningful lead in the contest. Not huge, but meaningful. Probably the most famous predictor at this point is a statistician named Nate Silver. And he kind of cut his statistical teeth predicting sports events, right? And he was a baseball statistician forever. And he developed some relatively sophisticated techniques, and he sort of scratched his head, and I could use these to predict other things too, right? And then he moved into predicting electoral outcomes and has been the best for the last couple of cycles at he's gotten really close to the popular vote and to the vote in the Electoral College. And so I think if you want to spend any time looking at these predictions, look at Nate Silver's site, 538.com. It was a good bit lower, in fact. Yeah, so that's his. And he's got three, if you look over in the left-hand column, right? And he's really good in that he's really transparent. He will reveal, for the most part, what he's doing, right? I mean, he'll tell you how he's coming to these predictions. And he tries to take survey data from each state. And then over time series, he weights newer data a little bit more than older data, but there is some weighting from the older data, and then does some predictive modeling where he quote, runs the election 10,000 times, right? Using some modeling, and then comes back with numbers that you can stare at. And the first model, he calls it Polls Plus. And so it's polling data plus some economic data plus some head scratching, right? I mean, a lot of people say, look, Texas might turn blue. No, it's not, right? Not this time around. It may get pretty close, right? But I'll buy you all a Dr. Pepper, right? You can come find me at my home campus. I'll buy you all a Dr. Pepper if Secretary Clinton wins tomorrow. I hope I'm right. Yeah, we'll see. All right, we'll see. Then the next model is just taking the polling data. And then the third model is using the most recent polling data, right? Polling data from today. And you can either look at that and go, well, it seems like a slam dunk, or you can go, well, there's about a 1 in 3 chance, right, of Mr. Trump winning the election. It is not impossible, right? The probability isn't high, but it's not impossible. And then Mr. Silver very nicely lays out how he thinks the electoral votes will go. And that's his guess. Let's look at math. The math, right? The math. Yeah. Right. Polls plus is probably what you want to look at. All right, and so he's predicting that Secretary Clinton gets about 300 electoral votes, which is plenty, puts her over the 270. Right? And that the popular vote will be, about a 3.5 point spread. Right.
That's what the Real Clear Politics site has it at right now. Today it's at 3%.
Yeah, and
Which is up from like 1.5%.
Real Clear just is an aggregation of every available poll that's out there, and it's all aggregated together. And he's doing something very similar here, right? So he's using that as the baseline data. Yeah, I mean, you can look at some of that other stuff and go, oh, come on, or the Daily Kos, right? I mean, just stuff that you really probably doesn't have much of a history of predicting this stuff. But, Nate Silver really has, I don't want to sing his praises, right? But I'll sing his praises, right? He's gotten quite good at predicting this stuff. Right? There it is. Right. You guys got questions for me? Have you voted? Going to vote tomorrow? Good on you, right? Get in the habit of voting, right? If you get in the habit, you'll very likely vote your entire life. If you skip an election, particularly if you skip the first election, those people rarely turn into voters, right? And I'll tell you, as somebody who's voted an awful lot, they're not all this bad. They're really not. Sometimes, they involve really intelligent people discussing policy alternatives, right? And things that you can go, yeah, I hear what you're saying, right? Instead of just going, oh, ick, right? So they will not all be this bad. Right? And there's a bunch of stuff beneath the presidential level that's way worth voting for, right? That's way worth voting for. Local stuff, state stuff that will really reach out and touch you, immediately, right? Immediately.
That was actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask. It's kind of a two-part question, but the first thing is since our district is so gerrymandered, basically people who vote in Austin basically have no voice at all because the district is still red, even though Austin is really blue. How do we keep career politicians like Lamar Smith from getting elected over and over and over?
Or Michael McCall, or any of a number of representatives, right?
I was researching this a little bit yesterday, which is admittedly a little last minute, but Tom Wakefield, I think is his name. He's the Democrat for the House of
Right.
Representatives. He's really cool, and like his platform is really interesting, and I would feel like he represents a lot of people in Austin specifically. But then I looked at the polls, and he's like 39% of like the district right now.
Yeah,
People who are going to vote, so which is actually really high. People are saying like, oh wow, like that's
sad but high.
That's as high as somebody's gotten like in Lamar's territory forever. But I mean, if you again, it just goes back to like the proportional thing. If you're just basically being blocked out because of somebody who drew a line somewhere, what is the best way to fix that short of writing?
My soapbox is that we have to demand changes to how these districts are drawn, right? That we have to eliminate the ability of career politicians to select their voters instead of the other way around. Because the way we've set the system up now is we let a career politician draw a district that will make them, virtually a lock to win all future elections. We have to change that.
Because I'm pretty sure in Casagrando's class, he was saying that I think it's Arizona is the only state that actually has a nonpartisan group draw the districts.
You could have a nonpartisan commission
Why don't we amend the Constitution
to dictate so.
make that the law? Because it just seems like that's just a no-brainer.
Preach on, brother. Preach on.
I'm saying it's like from a point of like helplessness, like what is there any sort of like way people can go about trying to make these changes?
One would think that if we all got angry enough, right, and demanded it, right, and then we get all skeptical. But honestly, I think eliminating the gerrymander, right, is really the key here. Right? And if one state did it, what did they do? Right? What did they do to demand that independent commission? A couple of states have bipartisan commissions, where you have equal number of Republicans and Democrats sit down at the map drawing table. There's some very simple software using a method called the shortest split line method, right, that will draw perfectly compact districts, right, with no human eyes involved. I just do not understand why we can't do something like that. We have to demand it, all right? What do we want? Shortest split line method. When do we want it? Now, right? Get out there in the streets and get angry, all right? But, you know, the sad thing is nobody's fascinated with this stuff, right? Nobody is fascinated with it. Yet it's what determines election outcomes, and elections have consequences. All right? They have consequences. I don't think I answered your question. Right, because I sob into my pillows. I sob into my pillows sometimes at night. Right, yeah, I really do. You said it was 2 parts.
Well, just the first part was
Okay.
with
Okay, right. And then what do you do? Yeah, what do you do? I hold out some hope that, you know, potentially the judicial branch would step in, right, and you know, tighten up the rules on gerrymandering. Short of that, I think we've got to, you know, we've got to demand changes. Right. It's in our power to do so. Right. We just have to get excited about that stuff instead of other stuff.
I mean, obviously it could happen on a state level, and you could see it kind of have a trickle effect where people pick up on it slowly.
Right.
But historically, it seems like the only time really radical stuff like that happens it comes from the top down.
Yep. Or something tragic goes wrong.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, because obviously the states aren't going to do that themselves because they're the ones who are gerrymandering. It's like
Right.
asking them to cut their own head
Lamar
off.
Smith has no interest in redrawing his district.
So, I mean, is there, I don't know, is there a way, is that something that could be amended in the Constitution, or would it have to be in
Definitely.
order, or like
Right.
something that the Senate and the House would have to do directly, or would it be a Supreme Court?
I think there's 2 or 3 different routes there. You know, a fundamental Supreme Court decision could do it, and there's always a gerrymandering case, right, queued up that they could rule on. We could amend the Constitution to impose national standards, because now we just let each individual state draw its own districts. I don't know that just a plain old run-of-the-mill bill would do that. All right. I think we're looking at amending the Constitution, right, or state-by-state change.
The last time that actually happened?
Amend the Constitution, 70, right, 1970. When we lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. Yeah, it's a long time ago, right? Yeah, and it does make you sigh heavily. What else? Go demand change. All right, go demand change. It's out there. All right, thanks a lot. All right. I appreciate your attention.